Welcome back to the FPAC Pro Bono YouTube channel. Today I'm speaking with Mitchell Shields at Team LWC and Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management based out of Oakville, Ontario. Mitchell is joining me today to talk about the importance of budgeting and cash flow, particularly for low-income Canadians. Thanks for joining me today, Mitchell.
Oh, awesome, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Mitchell, does everyone need a budget?
It's a great question, Mark. And I'd say like one of the issues with that question, if I can flip it on its head, is really the definition of budget, right? I don't know that every single Canadian needs what we would typically think of when we think of budget. Budgeting is kind of the second B word in a lot of ways. It's a scary thing to talk about. And I think that that's partially because it's designed to be very restrictive in nature, and there's a lot of work that goes into managing a budget. And there's a lot of truth that comes into managing a budget. So when we're thinking about budgeting, does every Canadian need an Excel spreadsheet where they track every penny they spend? I'd say no. But does every Canadian need some sort of structure around how they manage their cash flow? I think the prudent answer to that is yes. I think that for anybody who is managing their family money, they should be looking at it similar to a business, right? What are your family goals, much like you'd have business goals, and how are we allocating capital towards those goals? And that all stems back to a cash flow plan, which, to answer your question, would be a budget in most cases. So I'd say it's a yes and no answer to that question, Mark.
Why is managing your household cash flow so important?
Sure. I think that, again, unless you know where all your dollars are going, it's far easier to get caught off guard. And when emergencies come up or changes in the plan come up, if you don't have a process of how you manage your cash flow in place, it's going to be a lot more difficult from both a logical perspective, but also an emotional perspective to navigate those changes. Also, when you're dealing, for a lot of us, we're dealing with our finances potentially with a spouse. And if we don't have some sort of, system in place as a family around how we manage money, that's a great way to come into fights down the road. So I'd say that there's a lot of different reasons that we would need a cash flow plan, but all of them are good reasons. And I'd say there's not a lot of reasons to not have one.
What are some of the spending categories that tend to creep up on people, and how can they address these?
And when I'm talking about cash flow planning with clients, one of the things that I look at with most clients, and I'd say that everybody's different, right? Part of it is understanding, like we need to be honest with ourselves and we need to understand who we are as people. But really, in my mind, the cash flow planning breaks down into only a few categories. And really, when we really boil it down, it can be broken down into two categories. It's what are your non-emotional spending items and what are your emotional spending items? In the end of the day, are you going to creep up at Starbucks? Sure. Right. Are you going to creep up on Amazon? Sure. There's all kinds of, capitalism is really good at getting us to separate with our money, right? Marketers for years have been getting money out of our pocket. They do a very good job at it. So, lifestyle creep is real and keeping up with the Joneses is real. And there's a lot of categories that can creep up on a typical budget. But I think that the easier answer there is it's our emotional spending, right? Whether we're on at either end of the manic spectrum, we have a good day or a bad day, it's real easy to let that emotional spending creep up. And that comes in a lot of different forms.
What strategies can low-income Canadians use to cut costs out of their budget?
Sure. And this is going to also sound like potentially a little bit of a strange answer, but I think one of the things that a lot of low-income Canadians potentially would want to do to address the spending is, sure, first we need to be really honest and we need to get financially naked. We need to see where our money is going, right? And when we see that our money is going into a lot of, places, we can start to think about, well, does that spending on X dollars to this store every single month, does that align with my values, right? And do I value that enough that I'm willing to let it get in the way of some of the other things that I value, right? So I think being financially naked and candid with yourself is one piece. But another piece that I think might get missed a lot is it might be worth talking to a therapist as well, right? I think a lot of, especially in a lower income environment, well, and, it's funny, we were talking about this before the call. I wouldn't say it's just low income. I think that there's, everybody deals with this in a different way. But why are we spending on those items? Perhaps there is something that we need to work on ourselves where, we're using the dopamine from those purchases to satisfy something that we should be working on inside. And I'm not saying that I'm not being prescriptive in the sense that therapy is always the answer, but I think that that's something that I don't hear enough when we're talking about budgeting and cash flow planning, that it might make sense to spend a little bit of extra money for a small amount of time to find out why we're spending the way we're spending.
If there is someone watching this video who maybe has never created a cash flow plan or a budget and they want to get started, what would you suggest for someone in that situation?
The first thing I would say is lay out all of your expenses for the last 3 months. And again, it's going to be hard. A lot of Canadians don't even want to open their bank account to see how much money's in it. And I understand that this process is scary and this process is difficult. And, a lot of the times having a financial planner to work with as an accountability partner is a good option. But the first thing you want to do is get financially naked. And like I said earlier, typically with this exercise, I would have the clients break it down, not into all the different subcategories, but just into the emotional and the non-emotional spending. And the way that I explain that to people is you have a good day or you have a bad day. You're never going to come home and say, I had a bad day, I'm going to pay more on my heating this month. It's never going to happen, right? You might get something extra at the grocery store. You might use that one-click purchase on Amazon to buy something, that you're thinking about. But first thing we need to do is diagnose the problem, right? So let's look at how much of your spending is going to non-emotional spending items. That is a logical conversation. When we're looking at the non-emotional spending items, and if we see that it's an outsized percentage of your income, that's a logical conversation around where do we cut down expenses on that side. But in most cases, I find that the problem is on the emotional side, right? It's the emotional spending. It's the extra taps of the debit card, because it's so easy to get rid of our money nowadays. We don't feel it. It's an easy tap. It's an easy tap, or it's an easy click. We don't actually feel it go away, right? And seeing what that spending looks like as far as a percentage of our income. And then from there, what I would work through with clients is targeting a percentage of income for your emotional spending, which allows you to not be restrictive in your spending, but permissive in the sense of we know how much we can spend on emotional items. And nobody should tell you that buying a latte is not what you should be using that money on. If you get value from that latte, and that's what you want to spend some of your budget on, your call it allowance on, then more power to you. Nobody should tell you that that's not the appropriate thing to buy. But we need to look at that and target a spending target. And the third piece that I work with clients on, which I think is crucially important, is anytime we're building new habits, we need to empower ourselves to break our old habits, and we need to stick to this for at least 6 weeks at a minimum. And one of the pieces I often recommend is going to cash for your emotional spending items, because now we can actually feel the separation. It's like I said earlier in this interview, capitalism has done a very good job of getting people to separate with their money. And it's a big, it's a big final boss, if you will, to battle against as a consumer, to say, I'm not going to fall prey to these capitalist tricks, and I am going to be strong with my emotional spending. And it takes, a rebuilding of a habit that could have been being formed over the last decades, right? So it's not an easy process. And I think, again, being honest with yourself is one piece, but having an accountability partner is also important to make sure that there's somebody there to call you out on it, or on the other side, to provide you with those oxytocin hits of support when you're able to come back to the meeting as with an accomplishment to celebrate.
That's great. Thanks, Mitchell. I appreciate you doing this interview. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to get more videos from the FPAC Pro Bono Committee, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again, Mitchell, and
Awesome.
we'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.